Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers are reportedly keeping an eye on the future of Luka Doncic in Dallas. What exactly does that mean? Next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one is always free, never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube. So we can go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel. Quick reminder, as we thank you for making us your first listen, go ahead and make another Locked On podcast your second. May I recommend the Locked On NBA podcast, where this sort of NBA conversation happens, bringing on experts like us from all the local shows, keep up with everything going on in the league. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There are a couple things we didn't get to from Monday's show that we want to, including how the Lakers may or may not run their offense, at least how they would do it if Shaquille O'Neal was in charge. But interesting stuff over the weekend and into Monday from Kevin O'Connor, not the doctor, Joe Biden's doctor, but the NBA reporter. And
no politics, Brian. It's made very clear to us by David Locke. No politics.
I'm just telling you, there are two of them. One of them is the official White House doctor.
Well, now you've alienated 50% of our audience by letting people know Joe Biden's doctor is. Nice work.
Next,
Ronnie Jackson is Trump's doctor. Now everyone's happy. Everyone's happy now.
So
I don't know RFK Jr.'s doctor.
I don't know who his doctor is, and I'm not going to ask.
Plausible for these purposes, plausible deniability. Then again, we've left out nobody. We genuinely don't know.
Does Cornell West have an internist? I have no idea. This is
don't know.
Not my.
No, I have no idea when the last time Jill Stein's been to a doctor either.
Not my problem.
Nope.
So, Kevin O'Connor has reported, a few times, and it's come up in different ways. Came up again in his podcast with Chris Vernon at The Ringer that the Lakers are keeping an eye on the future of Luka Doncic in Dallas. There is some degree of, well, duh, because every team is keeping an eye on the future of Luka Doncic. And there's some element of, why now, given that Luka is signed for 2 more years, has a third year as an option, and has an extension, is extension eligible for just massive amounts of money. That certainly the Mavs are going to try to pay him, and that given that they had a pretty good year last year and seem to be on a nice upward trajectory, it seems likely that he'll take it, Andy. But it's at the same time also not surprising at all to hear news like this, that even if it's just sort of whispers, the Lakers are keeping track of a guy like Luka Doncic.
Well, first of all, it should be noted that Luka signing this extension, which would be worth over $348 million, the final season of which in 2030, 2031 would be worth almost $79 million per season. There's no reason that Luka can't sign that thing, then eventually ask to be traded. So the idea that Luka is extension eligible has absolutely nothing to do with the Lakers or the other 28 teams around the league monitoring his situation in Dallas, because they don't care what they'll pay him. They want him on the team. Kevin O'Connor's exact words from this, because I think the exact words are interesting for where we want to take this in our discussion. Quote, "I've reported on this podcast and on The Ringer how the Lakers have their sights set for Luka. We'll see if that works out. Dallas just made a finals. Dallas is looking better than ever with their supporting cast. That may not work out, but the Lakers, by not trading their future picks, clearly are still thinking long-term at this point. They're not going all in like you might expect many teams to do with James." And then he and Chris Vernon also talked a little bit more about that later. And I'll bring up another quote that he mentioned in the conversation with Chris. But I think right off the bat, though, that question of connecting the sights on Luka, however you even want to define that, with the Lakers thinking long term when it comes to those picks that they still have and that they have not yet traded.
Right. Linking the idea of not making trade.
Right. One of those picks,
Luka. Right.
One of those picks was what eventually became Dalton Connect, who obviously is as much about the future as he is the present. To me, that feels like, I don't want to say it's unquestionably not true because I'm not deep enough into asking around to know exactly the Lakers' thought process with this stuff, to know exactly how they are coveting the final 2 first-round picks they have total control over for a while, and why they have not moved them yet. But that being said, I don't think it's automatic that one definitively explains the other. I think that may be reading too much by Kevin.
Sure. And I think some of the a lot of some of these picks would even vest before this Luka thing would even happen. So, but what I think about it is when it does become, whether it's Luka, like this conversation to me isn't just about Luka Doncic, because it's really about the next star to play with Anthony Davis. Where are the Lakers going to find the next star to play with AD when LeBron is gone? Side note to this conversation, part of the reason that I love asking the question and kicking it around and talking to people about whether or not the Lakers are surprised and LeBron is still surprised at how well he's playing, and the idea that he might play a year or 2 or 3. And I don't even think it's totally out of the question they last long enough to play in the LA Olympics in 28. Like, I'm not betting on it. I don't think it's likely. Part of the thing that I think is interesting about that, though, is it makes this conversation more complicated because it's hard to add that third star until LeBron is gone. It's hard to plan for how you're going to add that star until LeBron is, or at least you have an idea of when he's going to be gone and all that. So I think that part's interesting, and we maybe can talk about that. But broadly, where I think there will be a time where the Lakers have to start making that calculation of, do we try to improve ourselves now, or do we hold on to our stuff because Luka Doncic, whether literally or figuratively, is possibly going to be available after next season or after 2 seasons or whatever it might be. And you would have to be, totally, just ignorant of Lakers history to think that they won't be making those kinds of calculations.
Sure. I mean, they certainly won't be alone, and I can promise you that every team around the league is also keeping at least something of a side eye towards Dallas, just staying in the loop, in the gossip, whatever, about just, is the relationship between Dallas and Luka as solid as ever? Does he feel happy about the future with Kyrie, Derek Lively, new ownership? That Mark Cuban's going to be taking more of a back seat moving forward. Like, how do all those things affect Luka's commitment towards the future? And again, like, as much as we talk about the Lakers being the most star effery team of all the teams around the league, again, the Indiana Pacers are going to be, watching with some degree of interest, because if Luka becomes even semi-available, that's news for the entire league.
But hold on a second, though, because there's an aspect of that I think really is specific to the Lakers that I want to keep hammering on next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by GameTime, and my daughter, she's 13. She's super into music, which has been a big bonding agent for us. Right now, it's Frank Ocean. She's obsessed with Frank Ocean. He hasn't put out an album in close to a decade, but she's heard that he's back in the studio, and that can mean a tour. And I promised her if he does go out on tour, I'm going to get us tickets, even though I know that's going to be a tough ticket, but I'm not worried because of Game Time. They make it easier. You can actually look forward to finding tickets. I love Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events just easier. They filter out the confusing, flowery verbiage, and they show you just incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've currently got a deal right now for Labor Day, 50% off for Dodgers at Diamondbacks in Arizona. So Dodger fans, whether in Arizona or willing to take a little roadie, exclusive on Game Time, limited availability and supply. So get on it if you're into it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off.
So you mentioned the Pacers, Andy, as like, the Pacers, the Magic. Name a team. They're going to be
maybe not the Pacers because that would mean reuniting Luka and Rick Carlisle. Although
maybe they've reconciled, or they would fire Rick Carlisle. If
I was just about to say he wouldn't be happy.
It doesn't matter. Throw a different team. It's Milwaukee. It's the Bulls. It's every team in the league. You're right, but only 2 or 3 or 4 of those teams are going to have any kind of real shot of getting Luka, or getting a version of Luka who wants to be where this is. He's somebody who is going to, if it got to that point in Dallas, he or Anthony Edwards, or pick a star this generation who is extension eligible, who will probably sign that extension, and then we'll all be talking about this again in 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, and all that stuff. The Lakers are the reason it's different when the Lakers get linked to something. And I'm always interested, like, where did this chatter come from? Was it an agent? Was it, league sources and all that kind of stuff? Was it somebody close to the Lakers or within the organization? It's like, we are really looking at, we think we can, clear the runway for Luka to come here in a few years. There's a huge difference to me with where these things come from, because every star ever who might have, gets 2.5 years or 3 years outside of their extension eligibility. What if they don't want to go? Remember, we did this with Giannis. And Giannis had a house out here. And it turns out lots of rich people have houses out here. But, he never got anywhere near here. We're going to do this with every star.
Yep.
If it comes from other teams, other agents, whatever, it's fine. It's if the Lakers are thinking about it that way, that's the part that's where it does start to impact how they do stuff, because they are going to be faced with a situation where you can either try to improve now, but it involves either giving up picks or taking on contracts. They're going to take you through the magical summer of whomever, or you wait and you hold your powder for that magical summer to take place. And this has been one of these places where the Lakers are constantly in a push-pull. They haven't done it over the last few years, but the who's next after LeBron thing puts them right back into this space. And that's where I think it becomes relevant for just sort of how the Lakers approach the next few seasons, really.
Well, potentially relevant, if nothing else, because like I said before, and something that Kevin and Chris talked about later in the show that got less attention was them acknowledging that, the Lakers so far, they have not done anything big this offseason. They have frankly done nothing this offseason other than keep their own guys, draft Dalton Connect, draft Bronny, and that has gotten a lot of Laker fans impatient or angry. It's certainly created a lot of questions among people who cover the league. But Kevin went on to say, quote, Brian, and I'm not 100% sure, I think he's talking about Windhorst. Brian asked a similar question. He says everyone keeps saying they need to go for it all and capitalize on surrounding LeBron and AD with championship level talent. My question is, for who? Who can they actually get with their assets? He, again, I think he's talking about Windhorst, but not 100% sure, says it's easy to say they should make a trade, but nobody can answer the question of what the returning package should be. And I think that's really the issue the Lakers have been presented with here. Who has become available that makes complete and total sense to throw all of their future assets at? I don't think that guy has made himself available yet completely. Then the two of them go on to kick around the idea of Zach LaVine. Both of us have made our thoughts on that very clear. No. No.
There's probably some scenario where you could get me to agree to it, but none that have been presented to this point.
No. But that to me is where the devil is in the details, because it's been an interesting summer where the Lakers clearly have not done enough to make this team feel like championship frontrunners. That beyond the fact that they haven't done any moves at all this offseason, like the roster as it is does not feel close enough. It's not a bad roster by any stretch. We both think it actually, if things break right, could be a pretty good roster, but it's not a championship roster. But just because they have not done enough doesn't mean that they've ignored the things that they could have or should have done. And this summer has been, I think, the most interesting and I think probably most compelling example of, that dichotomy between what hasn't taken place versus what can you actually fault them for not having taken place. They're not always the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about this on Monday's show. I need to know what they say no to before I can be super duper critical of why haven't you made a trade to improve the team. I need to know what you said no to. Like a couple of years ago, we talked about this last week. I think even it came up. Did you say no to Miles Turner and the Miles Turner Buddy Hield thing? If that was on the table, what were the parameters of that deal, and what did you say no? Why did you say no? I think that would have been a mistake based on what has been sort of reported.
I know I lobbied hard as hell to make that thing happen.
Since that trade, it's like, well, I can't grill you for not making trades that either weren't available or where the terms were really bad. Like the biggest thing that I've seen them apparently be willing to say yes to, if you believe the reporting, was the contract for Clay, which I thought was insane. So far this year, this offseason, it's the thing that they apparently were willing to say yes to that I find most disturbing, as opposed to there's been very little reporting that I've seen about the Lakers passing up the opportunity for player X, Y, or Z because they either wanted to hold on to their picks, they didn't want to get rid of player, somebody on their roster, whatever it might be. But one of the things that I was thinking about with this, though, is if we're in a place where the CBA makes it harder to do free agency, to make transactions, where fewer teams have the flexibility to make certain kinds of trades, and trades get harder to make, the free agency market becomes more like what we've seen this offseason versus previous years. Is that going to get the Lakers to think less about stars like Luka, like Edwards, like pick a player, Cade Cunningham, whoever it might turn out to be? Is that going to get them to think about these players less and focus more on internal development? Or is that going to be making them think about it more, where like you have to focus all of your energy, all of your tactics, and all of your strategy towards this one thing to give yourself the most reasonable opportunity? I'm not totally sure how that's going to play out because the CBA is so new. I could see arguments either way. But if you are focused like the Lakers on who that next star is going to be, then depending on what your strategy is to get that star, where you have to start can change. Like, does the starting point for 3 or 4 seasons from now begin this offseason? Does it start next offseason? Does it start 2 off seasons from now? Because all of those answers impact the product that we'll see in the interim.
Well, when we get back, before we possibly get to this question about what Shaq would do with the Lakers offense, we mentioned Miles Turner. There's one other potential flashpoint that I think you can maybe look at and say, if the Lakers were serious about everything they wanted to do in the LeBron era, that they had an opportunity in front of them and didn't take it. So we'll talk about that coming up next. Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel, and you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Like, that is the best $5 you will ever spend in terms of value. And then with a YouTube TV base plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account. Everybody's got one of those. A current form of payment. Everyone's got one of those. And you can sign up anytime. And while you start getting ready to sign up, you can also think about the 24-25 odds for the upcoming NBA season. The Lakers are currently 35-1, according to our friends at FanDuel, to win the championship. Anthony Davis, 150-1 for MVP. Dalton Connect, 10-1 for Rookie of the Year. Max Christie, 150-1 for Most Improved Player. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, Andy, you had a possible inflection point, sliding doors moment where somewhere on Earth 2, the Lakers have done something bold.
Well, I was thinking about this before we started the show, and actually I had in my notes Miles Turner just written down, just like the idea of, for all of the rightful focus that we've had about Russell Westbrook in terms of the path taken and the path not taken that they should have gone on, and how much damage that did to the organization and all the time spent unwinding it. But one of the potential, if memory serves, opportunities to unwind that was Miles Turner and that deal with Buddy Hield. I cannot say with certainty how much that truly was on the table for the Lakers. I've seen varying reports. I've heard varying things depending on who you ask, but I was pretty insistent at the time. If Miles Turner truly is available, the Lakers should do this because he is the best player I've seen available and I think will become available for the Lakers in the immediate future. Thus far, that was a couple of years ago and it still seems accurate. The other thing, though, and I brought this up in a recent show, but I also mentioned it right around last year's trade deadline. If the Lakers were really serious about DeJounte Murray and he would be an upgrade over anything they had in the backcourt, I do wonder if they stood too hard on keeping Austin Reeves and whether or not the way it's a stretch to say Austin's been labeled untouchable, but it's not a stretch to say he's been labeled pretty close to untouchable. Like basically if it's not for somewhere between an all-star and superstar adjacent, they're not including Austin Reeves. If you think DeJounte Murray is better than Reeves, and for what it's worth, I do, and you think DeJounte Murray would improve this team more than either Austin Reeves or D'Angelo Russell would, I'll just say Reeves needs to really take his game to at least one more level before you start wondering whether or not that was a mistake, looking back on it.
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, I do think the finances of these things matter because, with Reeves the minute you take Reeves off your roster and replace him functionally with a higher salaried player, you are putting yourself in a position where, you're kind of locked into your roster even more than you already are. Yeah. And so, those kinds of decisions need to be made even more carefully, I think. So
the flip side, though, is without DeJounte Murray, they feel pretty locked into their roster.
yeah, no, I'm just saying, I'm not even talking just about Murray. I'm just talking generally. And the gap between them big enough, and there's another player would have had to be included in that to make the money work, if I remember correctly. But there's a lot, similar to how we talked about D'Angelo. When you're talking about Jeremy Grant, it's Grant and the player you're talking about plus you have to start really factoring in how this is going to impact your rotation and all that kind of stuff. So those things I'm sympathetic to. And, I do think if you're going to make your really big swing, you do have to ask the question of, is this going
By the way, they would not have had to include that much, just for the record. They would not have had to include that much for DeJounte Murray because at the time he was making 18. So it would have been Reeves and Fuller
at the time. Yeah. Okay. That's fair. So, in that might have been a difference maker. So maybe in that case it makes sense, but there were, I believe, picks. I mean, some of it depends on just what the actual iteration.
But by all accounts, Reeves was the big sticking point. Yeah. Even more than the picks, it was Reeves.
Sure. Well, it's Reeves, and if you're asking for the picks and Reeves and all these things, now it starts to become a lot to give up for Murray. And he's a good player, but is he transformational? And this is the sort of the problem with the big swing concept is you put yourself in a position where, I know it annoys fans, only making a trade if it's going to turn you into a fairly surefire title contender. But if that's the only thing you've got in your option tree, if there is no plan B, if this doesn't work, we have these 4 moves because we have these assets and these picks and whatever. If you don't have any of that stuff, you really do need to make sure that your big swing trade is transformative in the way that you're talking about. So, I mean, I think that you can make a really good argument, and I know you've tried to, not just on this show, but in others, that it is tempting to be at the very least overprotective of Reeves. And I 1000% agree with you that he needs to be better. D'Angelo Russell, the best way to make Russell expendable is to actually make him expendable, is to have 2 or 3 other players on this team clearly be better than him. So Russell is your 5th best player, not your 3rd. The problem so far is Reeves hasn't definitively pulled ahead of D'Lo. D'Lo had a really good year last year, and Reeves played, I thought, pretty well. But that's got to switch this year, I think, for the Lakers. So stuff like that, I completely agree with you about that.
The other thing, though, that I think is worth mentioning in terms of the starting point with Kevin O'Connor talking about appearing to him, at least, and maybe it's also based on things that he's heard, asking around. Kevin's more of a reporter than either one of us. But the idea that the Lakers not making any moves with these final 2 picks, they have 2 first-round picks they have complete control over, signals a reticence to commit beyond or to fully commit to the LeBron era, that they want to keep at least some optionality for when LeBron finally either retires or leaves the Lakers, whichever comes first.
Right.
And the idea that it signals a less than a full commitment to what they are doing right now with LeBron and Anthony Davis. I think that's only true if they've turned down legitimately good deals for one or both of those picks. But the idea, and this is something I hear from a lot of people, not just Kevin, but a lot of people who cover the league, the idea that if you have LeBron, you are, for lack of a better way of putting it, obligated to always be going all in, because that's both being in the LeBron business and what you owe LeBron. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the idea that you somehow owe this to LeBron to cash in every single chip possible, even if you think the bet that you're cashing in on isn't really that strong of a bet. I don't actually think they owe that to LeBron. I think that's just bad business. I don't want the Lakers conducting bad business. That doesn't mean that unless it feels like a 100% certainty, don't make the deal. The NBA is about uncertainties. None of this is 100% predictive. But the idea that you could make a deal, let's say, that you feel like makes you 15% better, but in reality, you feel like you need to be 35% better in order to truly contend, and you're out of moves at that point. I don't think you're obligated to make the 15% move just so it feels like you're going all in for LeBron, and you don't appear so you don't appear unserious.
Right.
That's bad business.
There's a difference between being performative and effective. I think that you are. I don't know who would be arguing that the Lakers should get themselves 4/5 of the way to being a title contender, as opposed to 3/4 or 2/3 or whatever they are right now, and then not have any way to close that deal and whatever they get mocked for being not good enough. I don't like the framing of you owe it to LeBron. I don't think you owe it to LeBron. I didn't think they owed it to Kobe. I didn't think you don't owe it to these guys. If they did, they'd probably owe it more to Kobe than LeBron. Just Kobe's around for 20 years, but
they owed it more to Kobe than LeBron.
But even then, it's like they did a lot of stuff for both these guys. They put teams around them. They spent money. They paid them lots and lots of money and all that. And you can't do everything. But I think the problem is framing it as you owe it to LeBron. You don't owe it to LeBron. You owe it to the organization to take advantage of the presence of LeBron. It's not something you owe personally to that person. It's you owe it to the organization because you may not have another opportunity while a player of this caliber teamed with another player of that caliber and Anthony Davis is here to potentially deliver a title.
Sure.
And those circumstances are really hard to create. And so if they're not doing that because they are worried about reconstructing the team after James is gone, and again, they would have an easier time doing this if anybody had a freaking clue when that would be. But I do think they have the obligation to the organization.
Yeah.
Because, you can say, well, it's going to make our rebuild harder. Well, it probably would, but your rebuild's going to be hard either way.
I was just going to say.
And these moments and the opportunities, I do think you owe it. Who you want to assign that owing to, fine. But the opportunity is there. And so I'm not saying that they've passed on these deals. I need to know what they say no to. Say it a million times between now and the beginning of the season. But there is an obligation here. And I would say I'm not saying you can't look at all of the future, and you have to, be responsible with what you do, and you have to be smart with how you do it. But I certainly wouldn't have a lot of sympathy for them if they said, you know what, we had to hold where we were because we wanted to make sure that we could always be in 7, 8, or 9 or whatever it is after LeBron goes. No, if you have an opportunity to make yourself take a really good, legitimate title swing in the next year or two, and it's potentially going to make your job harder down the road, you do it. I think they will, by the way. But I think they've done a bad job of management to then put themselves in a corner where they can't even get the opportunity to take the swing. I think that's really what's happening.
Yeah, they have not put themselves in a particularly advantageous position, particularly desirable position. And I agree with you. If the opportunity is there, they should worry about the now and worry about the later.
Yeah, I agree.
I just don't get a sense, and I may be completely wrong, I don't get a sense that the reason they have not pulled the trigger on anything that has presumably or seemingly been out there is because they're too worried about what does 2027 look like.
Right. It has nothing to do with the potential availability of Luka Doncic in 3 years. Anthony Edwards, or pick a star.
Let me put it this way. I would like to think that it's not.
Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go hang out with over 25,000 subscribers to the channel, many of whom might actually have a creative way to get yourself in the Luka Doncic business. Reminder, you have made us your first listen of the day, which we really appreciate. Head over to the Locked On NBA podcast and make that your second listen of the day. Make sure you are understanding everything that's going on in the league as the summer rolls on and we get closer and closer to training camp. You can find a link to it in the show notes. You don't even have to go searching around for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We may take tomorrow off. Not totally sure. So if you wake up and there's no show there, don't freak out. It's not, your computer's not broken. But we might have a show. We'll see. But anyway, we'll see you next time.